Okay, great. So, welcome those of you who can join us. This is going to be an examination and discussion of diversity in digital media. And my name is Jeff Baker. I'm a professor of animation at the College of the Canyons, which is in Santa Clarita, California. And I wanted to start by looking at this kind of quote from Gina Davis. Gina Davis, the actor, she doesn't like to be called an actress, but she has the Institute for Gender in Media, which is part of the Academy of Arts and Motion Pictures. So as she says here, this is kind of where I wanted to start this, because, well, I was going to ask, think about the departments you are in and the idea of women or minorities in that department, and how many women or minorities are in that department with you. And oftentimes, this is kind of where we are right now, where maybe in a department of 10 or 12, there's 1 or 2 women, or maybe 1 minority, or something like that. And when you think that, especially when we're talking about women making up 50% or more of the population, why is it normal if there's 1 or 2 women in your department or in your group? Is that considered diverse? And that's kind of her point here, is that we're okay with that at this point. I mean, people feel that that's okay, that women only make up 16% of Congress, even though they are 50%, say, of the population. So that's something that I wanted to start with, is this idea of the normal, the way it is now, and how we can change this idea of the normal to be more inclusive, to be more representative of our communities as a whole, rather than the kind of status quo that we have right now. So again, the purpose is to begin a discussion among educators on how we can begin to address this discrepancy, both in post-secondary enrollment and in job opportunities for women and minorities in the digital media field, and I would also say in the IT field as well. I am not in any way an expert in this. I'm an animator and an educator. I'm not an expert in gender studies. I haven't done a lot of expertise or a lot of research into this topic. I'm coming in it more anecdotally, more from both my experiences teaching and from my experiences as an animator and in an industry. And I thought I'd give a little bit of background to this before we begin. Like I said, I teach animation at a community college. 3 of my 4 instructors are women, and one of my associates, called them my posse of women, and I was like, that's very strange to hear, but it does, I think, help that that a lot of my instructors are women, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. Also, the dean of my college is a woman, which I think the idea of women as instructors and women in administration give other women role models that they can look at, especially when the instructor is a woman. A lot of times, I think that can help women in the field. They have someone who is looking like them, essentially. And this is kind of a breakdown of women in some of the classes that we teach, and you can see these are classes in computer animation that I taught last semester. And you can see that it's less than half of the students are women in this. So 8 out of 23. At my advanced class, which was about video game animation and programming, only 3 out of 12. And one of those students dropped out. So really, at the end, where it was only 2 out of 11 were women. And then we also run a more traditional animation. This class was taught by a woman, so it's a little bit more 50-50. 13 out of 26 students were women. And this class was also taught by another adjunct who is a woman. 14 out of 25 students were women. So I don't know if there's any correlation. Maybe we can talk about it between the idea of a female instructor and more women wanting to get into that class. I don't know if you're teaching, whether you see that in your classes, or
I can start the ball rolling here because that is a consideration for us, because I'm in the computer technologies area.
Can you speak up a little bit? We can hear you in the I can hear you in the mic.
Okay, because I'm in the computer technologies area, and so we have the programming classes. And what we see is even our starting class in that series has very few women. We'll fill the classes with either 24 or 30 students, and we might have 3 women.
And you're the instructor?
And I'm the instructor. And we actually have 4 sections. We have, in fact, there are 3 women in our department of 7. So we're setting a good role model. But the computer science classes don't see the women coming in. I think the word computer, when I was looking up here, you've got flash animation, you've got computer, and advanced video games, and all of those are turnoffs to girls. I don't know why they don't try. And so the traditional animation, the things that don't have the computer word in them or something to indicate maybe a programming, then they all bail in and do. And we've really been concerned about this, trying to go out and reach out to girls. And girls are timid about their skills.
We'll get to that. That's very true. That's very true. Anyone else want to?
I think that you might be able to distinguish between recruitment and retention. And I think when it comes to retention, the gender of the instructor or professor comes into great consideration. But in terms of recruitment, it's usually listed on a class schedule with the professor's last name and indication of gender. Right. So that might help us better understand how many women enter the classroom on the first day.
Right.
Which is different than how many women stay in the course throughout the semester.
I do think that there is a correlation between the number of women who stay in and the fact that a woman might be teaching the class. I do think retention definitely helps in when there's a like role model there. And then just a little bit more of my background. I have my own animation company. I do forensic animation for courtroom presentation. The co-founder and partner of my business was female, or is female. But where I subcontract from to work with lawyers, no females work in that firm. So there's a lack of female representation there. I also do video game development. Most recently, I was involved in a video game for young adults. 2 of the 4 production crew were female there, so including a female who was a project manager and another one who was the game designer. But both the programmer and the artist myself were both men. So I think there's a kind of a discrepancy there. I also came out of a video game development when I worked full-time as an art director, we developed World War II simulations, not exactly a great subject matter for females, and it reflected in the company where only 1 of 55 employees were women. This was in the early 2000s. And in fact, the only woman was a part-time IT employee. So I think a lot of it had to do with subject matter, because before that I worked in a video game company called Her Interactive, which was a game developer for women and girls. We did the Nancy Drew series, and you see there were a lot more women employed here. I think because they looked at it as you know, something that is the subject matter was more interesting to women than it was than maybe World War II is to women. So, and then I also worked in broadcast television, and I think there were a lot more women, especially in front of the camera. I think it's a little less behind the camera, but there were, I believe, an equal number of female news anchors and reporters. One of the interesting things was 2 of 3 female directors. We had 3 directors, 2 of which were female, which in the early 90s and late 80s, that was unusual. But we also had a female production manager, so that may have had something to do with it. I think broadcast is a little bit better than games as far as representation of minorities and women, because I think they have to be. If you're in front of the camera and you only have white men, then you kind of turn off a big percentage of the population. So in front of the camera, I think in broadcast you see a lot more equality than you do behind the camera, and I'll show you more about that. So that was my background. So in the subject of diversity, I think there are a number of reasons why diversity is important. And one of the main reasons why it's important to me is economic. And I think that when you look at digital media and IT, we've been told like how many numbers of employees they're going to need, and all this need for IT and digital media people. And if we exclude women as an equal representation of the population, then we leave a lot of women behind economically. And this is especially true in other areas of the world, you know, other areas. So let's just play this little clip here.
And I'll follow back to one that you just ordered and start with technology. Who can, I mean, to be argue against the importance of technology and the transformative power that technology and information technology we have to transform, especially when they are given to population and people who are eager to change and eager to transform their community, their society. We have witnessed this story across the world, and we have seen, I mean, from political change to economic prosperity, technologies where.
So I think that the idea that he's trying to get across is that economically we have to bring all types of people, all genders forward, and they have to be included in the technology that we're teaching. So one half is economic importance of diversity. The other half is the need for different voices and perspectives to form a complete artistic and historical culture. If we're only going to tell stories from a man's point of view, from a white man's point of view, then we have a very skewed idea of art and culture and history. So Gina Davis will talk a little bit about
depictions in media. We're actually now in the middle of our first global gender and media study. It'll be the first in the world ever done. And what we found was disturbing because what kids are seeing is very much bereft of female presence. For example, in family films, the ratio of male to female characters is 3 to 1. So for every 1 female character, speaking character, there are 3 male characters. And this is the most disturbing aspect. In crowd scenes or group scenes in these movies, only 17% of the characters are female. So, in other words, the fictitious worlds that are being created for children to see and for the world to consume, 80% of the world's entertainment media is created in the United States. So we are exporting an image of women that is not positive.
So, and that ends up, I think, talking the idea of role models. And we're going to talk a little, have a little handout about this. We can talk about it. The idea that, you know, like you were saying, in computer science, there's very few computer science, well, you know, girls wanting to take computer science or get into computer science. And I think part of it is because they look around the world, they look at media, they look at books, they look at movies, and they don't see that as a female role. And that part of it is self-perpetuating, in that they don't see the role, so they don't go into the field. So we can talk more about this idea, but those are the 2 main reasons that I see the real need for diversity in digital media and in IT are these 2 things, the economics and this idea of a complete cultural history, if we will, that includes all people and not just from one necessarily point of view. I don't want to bore you with a lot of facts and figures, but I thought these were pretty interesting. When you look at the top down, in other words, from the corporate heads down, 15% of Fortune 500 board seats for communication companies are made up of women, and fully 1/10 of all Fortune 500 boards had no women serving on them. 6% of chief executives at the leading 100 tech companies are women, and women of color make up only 3.3% of the total board seats on Fortune 500 companies. So at the top, women aren't equally represented, and certainly women and minorities are not. In filmmaking, 29.8% of filmmakers were female. These are writers, directors, producers, cinematographers, and editors. So it's still a large percentage. But what you see is that for every 15.24 male directors, there's 1 female director. So in the idea of the director as the head of the film, you see that most are from a male point of view. And most females are more in the documentary than in the narrative film. So 34%, 34.5% of women direct documentaries versus 16.9% that direct narrative films. Documentaries are generally smaller budgets, less people involved, and that kind of thing. So there's, you know, women tend to make up more of that end of the filmmaking world. Like I said, in broadcast television, it's a little bit different. 26% of the creators, executive producers, the head, what they call above-line people, are women. 28% of news directors are women, and only 16% of general managers. So it's not a lot of people at the top of the food chain are women, and it's even worse when we look at women of color. 18% are local news directors, and only 10% of general managers. So it's even worse there. Information technology, 24% CIO positions, 26% professional computing occupations. I don't know that that's correct. To me, that seems high, but that's just all computing occupations. It does seem a little high. And again, minority women, it's even worse. I mean, a lot worse. 3% of the computing workforce are African American women, 4% Asian, and only 1% Hispanic women. So clearly there's a huge need there for diversity and for an outreach towards minority women especially. And so why are so many women and minorities left out of digital media and IT? And that's the overriding question that I want to examine. And I want to examine this in the 3 different areas: industry, media and society, and then in academia. And we as educators can most affect this area of academia. I think we can use our influence here to help change industry, but we have very little media and influence in media and society. I think that this is the area that I'm going to concentrate on, the academia area, but we do have the ability through how we teach and who we teach to affect the industries that we're in. And then maybe ultimately they affect the society and what we see in media. So some of the barriers that exist in the industry, I'm going to start in the industry, and this is kind of in the industry of filmmaking. One of the most, even if the student goes through filmmaking, one of the first barriers that they run into, if you're a woman, is that you're in a male-dominated world. Like we said, that quote at the beginning was this idea that you may be the only woman in a whole team dominated by men. So how can you deal with that? And these were 2 young filmmakers, and they had some interesting thoughts on that.
So I think that, you know, because you can do that when you're a kid because you're not dealing with the real world. And I think the problem is that camaraderie isn't held through to adulthood. And I think that many women become so concerned with proving that they can make it in a man's world, so to speak, that they don't connect with other female filmmakers. Yeah, they allow themselves to become competitive rather than compatriots of. And I think that the strongest thing you can do as a woman, especially a woman interested in any kind of genre, whether it's comedy or horror or action or sci-fi, is find the other women that share your passions and grow with them rather than trying to beat them or, you know, when you're allowing yourself to be, say, a token in a writer's room or in any kind of creative situation, it may seem good at the time because you're getting a lot of resources. And the myth is that those are not infinite resources, that you can't share those, that if another, say, girl comes into the group, that, you know, it's half as many resources for you and half as many for her, but really it's double. It's not, there's no such thing as like, you know, you can only have this many women in a group, or they can only have this much female influence in a group. It just doesn't work that way. And I think that more girls need to really just band together and do what they want to do.
So I think her suggestion of you know, or idea that women tend, you know, when they're in the situation in a male-dominated team, that they tend to compete. I have seen that in groups where that I have seen that happen. I mean, do you guys do team work? Do you, and if you do, do you try and mix gender, or how, how do you guys, on an educational level, how do you deal with teams and gender and that kind of thing?
I'm going to build this on the flip side of this. I teach in early childhood education, so we beg to get men to the field. So we're on the completely opposite side of that, but absolutely when we have males when I have males in my classes, A, we do a lot of group work anyway because I think it's really important, and then B, to include men in those group projects so that we get that balanced amount of discussion and input into the projects that we're working on.
In that particular case, too, those men are what's called non-traditional.
And they are.
And they are subjected to the same type of...
Exactly. Reverse. Absolutely.
Yeah, men in nursing, I think it's the same thing that we encounter too. And I know that I teach online class where the groups are important, but I actually tend to group them depending on their where they're coming from, more than, are they, or their declared majors. And so if I've got a student that are, I'm web development, it's coding. And so if I have a group of students that are in the graphics area, I'm going to group them together regardless of gender because their skill set will probably be very similar. And so I find it's more successful to group by skill set. Because a lot of women, there are women programmers, that we see them, but they're just in the minority. But I'll see them perhaps even more so in web development than they might see in programming. That they're in there, and in web development I actually see more women in subsequent classes than I do in the beginning class. So they're like stayers. Yeah. The guys, you lose the guys. Right. And the women will stick it out. So as you get to the advanced classes, I might be almost 50-50, 60-40. I mean, I will see a lot more women at that stage. But our core classes, the one that we have it combines a little HTML and a little programming, but it feeds into the networking area. Networking, there's not very many women. Programming, as much as our Linux instructor is a woman, our CS instructor is a woman, and in web development, we're pretty strongly, the day out of 7 full-time faculty. That's pretty good. Yeah, we've got 3 women.
I think speaking to that question of camaraderie versus competition, I think that in the context of a capitalist society and cultural capitalism, I think you tend to see people are motivated to have a higher education because they seek a class mobility. So it's not necessarily a gender mobility, of course, or a racial mobility, but a class mobility. And class is very much individualized in our nation and in our society. So I think that might help explain a level of competition and why sort of this gender identity is sort of subjugated to class identity, where they feel like they have to get ahead, and their primary competitor is not every other male in the room, but possibly it's the other one female in the room, right? Trying to stand out, because they already are also self-conscious of their gender and the fact that they do stand out. But I think that one of the main primary motivators for any student, regardless of gender, on why they want to do well in their class, oftentimes there's a stronger link, I think, to class and class mobility. And again, it's individualism in that sense.
Yeah, it's kind of like the competition because there's more men in the field. I think the women feel that there's one seat for them, they better fight to get that one seat. They have more. They feel more competitive towards the other women, like you say, that because of that class mobility, they look at it more from I'm going to succeed in, you know, it's not the cooperative nature of, you know, that gets brought out. It's that competitive nature. I would agree that a lot of it is class and that class mobility, that desire to succeed, to move up.
And I can attest to it. I mean, I've observed it all of my career from both standpoints, to being a minority and a woman. I think I totally agree with what Gina Davis says, is that we have accepted that as the norm. And I think it's a lot worse, you know, 2 or 3 decades ago, but it's still so embedded in our culture.
So going on, I found this to be very interesting. This was from BAFTA, so this is British Academy of Film and Television Arts. And what happens with a lot of times in industry, and I saw this when I worked in television, is that there's a lot of women at the entry levels, and then as they get older into their 30s and 40s, that women are forced to choose between their career or workplace and more traditional gender roles, specifically like child raising and that sort of thing. So that's, I thought, was another issue that comes up maybe later in a woman's career. Okay, where is it? Nope, don't go back. There we go.
I think there's a wider point here about diversity. Our workforce in the film industry is not representative of the society or the workforce in general, or indeed the workforce that's predominantly London and South East based, by many percentage points. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that, and some of those reasons have to do with fair access and open recruitment, or not open recruitment and not fair access. And in terms of women and their entry to the industry, if you look at the statistics, actually more women enter the industry than men, but they drop off. They drop off mostly when they get to the ages of between 30 and 40, and they pretty much disappear over 50. And that isn't comparable to other industries, and it isn't comparable to the journey of men in the industry. And I think there are lots of debates about this, and there are lots of things we can do about it, but one of the reasons is the issue of freelance working patterns and being a woman with responsibilities for childcare or other commitments and so on. And that is a real issue that from juggling careers and taking breaks and re-entering and not finding that an easy thing to do in predominantly freelance or digital life job industry.
And that's an interesting point. I don't know if it's necessarily true in the IT field, but it is certainly true in digital media and filmmaking, is you are only as good as the last thing you worked on. So if you fall off the track, then you are gone. So if you take 2 years off to raise a child, until they're, you know, maybe you feel that they're ready, your opportunity to then re-enter the workforce is greatly diminished. And that's the nature of filmmaking, is, you know, what have you done lately? And because women generally take the time off rather than men to raise children, to have children, I think they fall off in much greater numbers, obviously, than men do. And I don't know that there's any, you know, easy way to overcome that barrier, and I call it a barrier to advancement. Because generally, like she says, in their 20s, you know, you see a fair number of women entering the filmmaking, but by the time they're in their 30s or 40s, when they should be becoming directors, cinematographers, directors of photography, that sort of thing, the higher level jobs, they're being, they drop off because of their need to take the traditional gender role of mother and child bearer. So I don't know if there's any easy or
well, there's dialogue beginning to really increase around this since Sheryl Sandberg's book Lean In, and it isn't much different in the ICT sector. And I really think that it's a cultural thing that has to be worked from the top down and the bottom up. First of all, women have accepted that the reason they drop out is because they decide to have families and their traditional roles in raising a family. They say, okay, I can't be like a man. In other words, I can't take a break for 3 months or to have this baby and come back because of 2 reasons. They don't have fully engaged partners because our society delegates women as being the caregivers. Okay, that's one problem. I think those women that do have fully engaged partners in raising a family can come back. And, Sheryl Sandberg is showing that, Marissa Myers is showing that, and I think we need to have more examples like that from the top down. And from the bottom up, I think women in the roles that we're in right now, whether you're an educator or whether you're a manager in IT, you must insist upon that I don't have to be like a man. I'm a woman and I have a family and this is what I need to do, but I'm still smart, and even though I take some time off, I can come back in here and I can get this job done. But we kind of, and I've been guilty of it most of my career, is that we accept there's only one in the role. I won't sit at the table. I'll sit back along the wall when I should be at the table. I think we have to, as Sheryl says, lean in. I really think that we've got to start having that dialogue, and I think it's more about men changing than women changing.
And I think that brings up this next point, which is the glass ceiling, or as this interview calls it, the brick wall for women. And Judy Shakin is, she's one of the few female directors. She directs mostly documentaries, and she'll talk a little bit about this, just this idea that you brought up.
They call it a glass ceiling, but I call it the brick wall in terms of being a female filmmaker. So what do you think are some of the things that make it tougher for women, and what are some of the things that we can do to break down those barriers, or maybe we're not there yet?
Well, the thing that makes it really tough is that you don't get a chance to be part of the club. Every business has its club that nurtures new young people who come in, and somebody wants to pass on the knowledge. Well, nobody wants to pass it on to a girl in the movie business. They just don't. You're not part of the club. And if you're not part of the club, it's very hard to learn your craft. And it's hard to be an insider, and it's hard to get to the place where you can even get a chance to prove yourself as a director. So that's why I call it a brick wall, because there's very limited resources. Now, that's not to say they don't exist, because as you can see, some women are really breaking through in big ways. But generally, unless you have some kind of special you're not going to get there just by being good or being talented or doing everything right. It's just not there for you. So that's the brick wall. And I think if you look at it as a brick wall and you say, well, I'm going to stop butting my head against this brick wall and I'm going to find another way to do this, that's where you go out and you find some other way. And for me, doing documentaries is the other way to do it. Or to do any of the other things that I do, like I direct in theater and, wherever else that I possibly can. And that's my answer for myself. I think everybody has to find their own answer, but that's what I've found.
You said you think that maybe it's a system designed to would fail?
Well, yeah, you know, I really take that from the comment that Amy Pascal made in the news the other day, or she was quoted as saying that the system is set up for women to fail, and that's because of that same thing. There is no process by which you can automatically move up the ladder. And that isn't to say that it's not hard. It's hard for men to move up the ladder too. But if you feel that you're a really gifted filmmaker and that that's what you're meant to do in life, then there should be ways for you to pursue that. And when you get out there and you don't find any ways open to you, that's where the system is set up for you to fail.
Crazy. I remember we had a conversation at a time we were talking about the article that leads to wars, and we were discussing that. How do you think that the system is designed for women to fail in terms of what Amy's argument?
Well, even if you get a shot at it and you don't have the support that you need in order to be successful, then the chances of failure are pretty big. And especially if you come onto a set where everyone's hostile to you. You know, I didn't used to believe that was going to happen. I used to think, well, you know, I'm a really good person to work for. People love to work with me. I can get on a set and, you know, I'll make everybody feel good and we'll all work well together. Well, the first time that I came onto a set of a commercial television show, I found enormous hostility by men on the crew who wanted to do what I was doing, and they had been laboring on this particular show for 2 years, 3 years, and who is this chick coming in who's doing the job that I don't get to do? And a lot of undermining went on, and that was a bit of a shock to me. So the setup to fail exists still.
So, I think she put it pretty well there. I'm going to go through a couple of this idea because I do want to talk about the educational issues, and I'm kind of running a little bit long here. So, those are some of the industry issues. And then I was looking at what are the educational issues that women face. And I found this blog, which was from a female computer science graduate. And she points out, I think, 5 different problems that she has identified with her colleagues for women in computer science. And I thought this was pretty interesting. So I'm going to go through these bit here.
I'll be your host, Keeping Glassman. I'm also the chair of Women in Computer Science. So I've been doing research on women in computing and girls in computing. And over the terms, I've started to realize that in the outgoing students, there seem to be complaints that a lot of them share. And a lot of them have to do with the way the classes were taught. So it seems that a lot of the reason that women will lose interest in computer at the collegiate level has to do with the professors and the curriculum of the course.
So one of the issues is the attitudes of the professors and staff.
What I want to know is just how important the teacher's attitude and that of the TA, the teacher's assistant, are to females in courses. And it doesn't seem to be the case with males, but with women, the less hospitable and approachable professor or teacher's assistant is, the less likely they are to perceive the class as something that they can handle. And they're more likely to withdraw and not do as well as students.
So maybe that's something that's true, is the attitude of how, you know, the
I can attest
professor.
to that because our College of Engineering has a huge number of Middle Eastern men in it. And their opinion of women, you are nothing. You are nothing. Don't bother to ask them questions. They're not going to answer. Don't bother to.
And that may bring up this next, which is outright sexism.
Also sexism. Sexism, fortunately, according to these studies, is on the decline, which is also something that I feel like personally noticed over the last decade or more that I've been in college. But that doesn't mean that the importance of it hasn't changed. So women are much more likely to internalize sexism or racism that they start feeling in classes and portray those traits in what they're doing. So even if they didn't start out feeling weak in computer science, if they're experiencing that sexism, they will internalize it and eventually perceive themselves as weak, and again, not do as well. And so you need to then drop in the major.
So, another idea is the types of assignments, and I can attest to this. The types of assignments. In my character animation class, I always used to use a male character, and we would animate a male character. And then about last time I taught it, I was like, well, why, I examined that, and I gave, so now there's a choice. They can animate a male character or a female character. It's a small, simple step, but I think if you look at all of these small, simple steps like that, like the types of assignments, what it is that women want to do versus what it is that men want to do. Collaborative learning is another thing. I think women are more engaged when they're doing collaborative learning. And even more importantly than that, I think that the idea of problem-based learning, the idea of taking a real-world situation is important to not only women, but the people at the lower end of the economic ladder, certainly at the lower end of the educational ladder. I think that a lot of my students struggle at the conceptual end of things, but they're very good at real-world practical learning, and if they can see it in the real world, it's easier than if it's kind of all higher-level conceptual thinking. I'm just going to go through to the end of here. The pace and workload of a class and the step increase in class difficulty are also something that I hadn't really considered. But what she would say is that the idea of having a clear goals for each class and a clear idea of each assignment's difficulty, that each assignment builds on the previous assignment, that is important for women and for minorities. This idea that you can see how one thing builds upon another thing. And that, to me, I think that's important for all of my students. I know all of my students really appreciated when I put a rubric to an assignment so that they know exactly what it is that they're to do, and they don't waste their time doing something that they aren't going to get graded for. I hadn't done that in the beginning, but I think men and women of all appreciate the fact that there's a rubric assigned. And then, of course, the lack of role models and peers. One of the things that I instituted, and you might want to take this back, is that I invite my alumni graduates to come back and talk to my students, and I specifically ask my minority graduates, those Latinos, African Americans, women, to come back and talk about their experiences. And I think that especially if they see other students who have succeeded, other students like them who have succeeded, that's, as far as role models, that's really powerful. If you can see that in that. So that's kind of where I was hoping to get more discussion into this. I'm sorry I didn't, but if you, these are, you know, some of the possible solutions. And the other thing I'll mention that I use just as a inequality is to make sure that student leadership roles in the classroom are evenly divided between men, women, and minorities. In other words, I don't let the men automatically become leaders, because that's kind of the role that they want to play in a male-dominated classroom. Is that, oh, I'm the guy, I've done this since high school. But I do try and bring women, and I think that they do a better job in many ways as student leaders. They're far more likely to get a consensus on an issue before moving on, for example, whereas men tend to just like, this is, I'm going to do it this way. So one of the things that I did was, when I divide up my class into teams, if I'm assigning roles, and sometimes I do, if there's a role as team leader, that I try and mix it up enough and make sure that you know that women have an opportunity to be leaders in their group.
So yeah, just take maybe 2 more minutes to kind of wrap up.
Do you have preferenced your rubric, so goals and rubrics? Do you have any examples, or do you have them on your that you use yourself?
I didn't bring them with me,
okay.
But if you're interested, I have my email at the end, and I can do that, because
Is it on your handout by chance, your email?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's at the end here. Yeah, I think that was really important. And like I say, it wasn't just men that kind of were, I mean, women who kind of appreciated it. I think everyone came to me and said, you know, thank you for putting your rubric up with your assignments, because otherwise, you know, I didn't do that, and I realized that really students didn't have any idea of what I was grading on, especially in a subject like digital media, because so much of, you know, it's subjective. What looks good to one person may not look good to another person. So I felt that I had to break it down as a rubric so that students understood, no matter how good your art is, everyone comes at a different, you know, I can't draw very well, I can draw great. So how do you grade those two things? So I had to develop a rubric to kind of break that down, and we'll put it up. So I
really have to cut you off to get prepared for the next.
Sure. So that's my email address. You can feel free to contact me, and I will send you any information you need. Thank you.
Thank you so much.